I saw this comment from a video last week that says you should do two dynasty lists. One, rebuilding, and one, win now. Now, I'm not going to do my rankings just for a rebuilding team, then just for a contending roster. Instead, though, what I thought was a good idea is looking at the overall community rankings list and putting the players into brackets. Players that I only want on contending teams, players I only want on rebuilding rosters, and players that are cornerstone assets that you can build around both to win now as well as the future. So in this video, we're going to be diving into all quarterbacks as well as all tight ends and trying to classify these assets. Are they rebuilding pieces, contending pieces, or cornerstone pieces? Starting off at the very top of Dynasty rankings, very rarely are you ever going to see an asset that is not a cornerstone piece, right? At wide receiver, you have your guys like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CD Lamb, that of course you're happy to contend with right now, but at the same time, they're going to have a considerable amount of value going into the future, and you don't necessarily need to sell them if you're not ready to contend. Similar story here at quarterback, where at the very top, you have Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, CJ Stroud, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, as well as Jalen Hurts. Now, these are going to be the community rankings on flogfantasy.com. This is not exactly how I would rank these players. Of course, if you want to see my rankings, just hit filter, add expert, Mason Dodd, and then you can find mine. But nonetheless, if we were looking at this, I would say the majority of these guys should be viewed as cornerstone assets, if not all of them. Obviously, they are all phenomenal assets to contend with in the short term. If we are projecting out long term, however, I know people are going to hate me saying this, and I completely understand why, and you can roll your eyes. I get it. Lamar and Jalen Hurts, these quarterbacks that primarily win based off their athleticism, I am not saying that they will not be capable quarterbacks. I am not saying that they are not great talents throwing the football, but I am going to be a little bit more concerned of how they will age in comparison to a Patrick Mahomes, in comparison to a CJ Stroud, in comparison to a Joe Burrow. Where if you're looking at someone like Lamar Jackson, even if you believe that he is a very capable passer, even if you think that he has a great arm talent, we can all agree, whether or not you're a Lamar Jackson fan or not, that so much of the value that he brings is what he can do athletically. He is a special, if not the most special quarterback in the entire NFL right now. Now, the question that I would at least be willing to bring up is, while Lamar Jackson right now is the most I don't want to say the most athletic quarterback in the NFL, but you get the drift. I mean, if he is at the very top of the NFL with this athleticism, with how he can manipulate opposing linebackers, with how he can pick up rushing stats, I mean, really at ease. If that doesn't carry over to when he's 30, when he is 31 years old, could you see a drop in the overall play of Lamar Jackson that you may not necessarily experience with CJ Stroud, that you may not necessarily experience with Joe Burrow? I personally think that Lamar will age a little bit closer to Cam Newton rather than Tom Brady. Typically at quarterback, I'm not worried about a quarterback's age at all. However, when it comes to those QBs that find so much of the value in what they do on the ground, I'm going to be a little bit more concerned. And for that reason, if I had Lamar Jackson, if I had Jalen Hurts, and I'm a rebuilding roster, and I can pivot over to a younger Justin Herbert who wins in more of a traditional way, just standing in the pocket and obviously being that big-bodied thrower, I think that game's going to age a little bit nicer, where if I'm a pure rebuilding roster, I would probably rather try to move off of Lamar and pick up Justin Herbert and a future first, which right now, based off the community rankings, with Lamar being at 4 overall and Herbert being at 11, I think could potentially be possible. Now, going over to our second page, guys that we have here are Anthony Richardson, Kyler Murray, Jordan Love, Trevor Lawrence, Brock Purdy, as well as Tua. All these players very young. I mean, the oldest guy on this list is Kyler Murray. It seems like Kyler's been in the NFL forever, but I mean, he came out at a very young age coming out of Oklahoma. So, I mean, ultimately, I would say all these quarterbacks are very similar cornerstone assets. I feel fine contending with all these guys in the short term. I feel fine with all their long-term value as well. If I'm a rebuilding team, I'm pretty much fine with all these names. You can maybe say, well, Mason, would you be worried about Kyler Murray aging into his age 28, 29, 30 seasons, similar to what you would see with Lamar? I think it is a fair question to ask yourself and how you believe those quarterbacks will age. The difference in my mind is Kyler Murray is currently being valued as a second-round startup pick, where if you were pivoting off of Kyler Murray to a quarterback that's underneath him in the rankings, it's not as easy to pivot to just like Justin Herbert and pick up an extra pick, right? Instead, if you're going from Kyler Murray to a quarterback that's under him in the community rankings, you're looking at Jordan Love, Trevor Lawrence, Brock Purdy, and Tua. And maybe if you're a rebuilding roster and you really wanted to pivot from Kyler to Trevor Lawrence in a future pick, I would understand it. I just don't necessarily think it's a clear-cut answer here. Obviously, all these guys at the very top, are at the top of rankings for a damn good reason. I think you could feel comfortable with them. Another thing I want to point out is if you're looking at the rankings on flogfantasy.com, it's going to be the same for the community rankings, which are completely free. You can pull this up whenever you want, but as well as the expert rankings and my rankings. All the rankings that you look, we are going to have the rookie picks entered in as well. That way you can get a great sense of, okay, if I wanted to sell Anthony Richardson, where does his value lie? And you can go to the community rankings and you go, okay, he's right in between the 102 and the 103. So if I'm buying, I'd probably feel comfortable buying him for the 103. If I'm selling, maybe I'm looking for the 101 or 102. So yeah, all the rankings list that you're going to see will have these rookie picks in the mix. And I think it's just an extremely valuable little data point if you were trying to go through and sell some of these names. Now, going over to our next list, this is where we begin to see a little bit of a different story, and maybe you can find some of these guys that begin only being contending assets. We have Dak Prescott, Jared Goff, Deshaun Watson, as well as Baker Mayfield. And a big thing in how I look at assets from a rebuilding to a contending perspective is if I believe that player can't do anything to increase their dynasty fantasy football value 12 months from now, I'm going to classify them as a contending piece. If I think there is a more than, say, 60% chance that they are worth less in dynasty 12 months from now, almost regardless of what they do, that asset is going to be one that just has to be on a contending roster. And if you're rebuilding, you should sell them. So even though we look at Dak Prescott, and Dak Prescott is 30 years old, it's not as simple as being a running back. It's not as simple as being a wide receiver. I don't think you can say Dak Prescott's a quarterback that only fits a team that's ready to contend, even though he is 30. Because if you're looking at the price point of Dak Prescott, he is right now hovering around that mid first round pick, right after the 106 and right before the 107. So he's being valued, if you're looking at quarterbacks from prospect rankings perspective, maybe around like JJ McCarthy. If you want to look at other rookies like Rome, Bowers. If Dak Prescott comes out, has a great year for the Dallas Cowboys, gets a contract extension, this is a quarterback that could very easily continue to rise in value going into the next season. So just because Dak Prescott is 30 years old, I understand he's probably a better asset for a contending team. And I would definitely say if you're a rebuilding roster and you can sell Dak for like the 104 and bring in Drake May, it probably makes sense for you to hit that reset button. But specifically at these prices, I do think that there's some room for Dak Prescott to increase 12 months from now. So I don't think this is a situation where you just absolutely have to sell him and get him off your team. I'd almost say the same thing with Jared Goff. Goff's been in the NFL forever, but Goff doesn't win with athleticism. Goff wins standing in the pocket. Hopefully being a smart quarterback back there, picking the right guys. 29 years old. What we have seen is these guys have like a 10-year runway if they are very talented pocket passing options. Not to say that Jared Goff's going to play until he's 39, but would I be surprised if Jared Goff was worth more than the 108 next offseason? Not necessarily if he has a great year. So again, because of his age, he's probably an asset that makes a little more sense to see what you could get if you were to go through and sell him on a contending team, but not necessarily something that you have to do. Going over to Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson is a quarterback that has $200 million still in the dead cap. It is absolutely insane. $136 million in the dead cap in 2025 and $72 million in the dead cap in 2026. So looking at Deshaun Watson, he's 28 years old. He's been very bad over the past 2 years. Your natural inclination would say, okay, you only want him on a contending team. He's a declining asset. He's been declining for years, yada, yada, yada. I think it's a possibility he's worth more than the 109 next offseason. He is penciled in to be the Browns starting quarterback this next season. They bring in Jerry Jeudy. They have Amari. They have David Njoku. Maybe Deshaun Watson stays healthy and takes a step forward. So, I think that Watson at this price, if you can move off of him and get the 108 and maybe hit the reset button if JJ McCarthy ends up being a top 10 pick and take JJ McCarthy instead, I'd definitely prefer that from a rebuilding standpoint, but not an asset that you absolutely have to sell. Almost say the same thing, Baker Mayfield 28, but would I be surprised if Baker Mayfield was worth more than the 110 next offseason? No, I wouldn't. So you're going to see the majority of these quarterbacks, right? We can say, okay, Lamar, Goff, Watson, Dak. Maybe these are guys that you throw on the trade block, and if you're a rebuilding team, you see what you can get, and if you get a great price point, you can sell. But because you have the extended runway at the quarterback position in particular, you can be a little bit more lenient in holding on to these guys, even if you're that rebuilding roster. Of course, when we go over to running backs, I will have a completely different tone. Now, as we pull up our next guy, Kirk Cousins has been a massive riser. I'm going to have to update my startup rankings on flogfantasy.com. Right now, I have Cousins way too low. I just updated our prospect rankings. So if you want to check out my updated rookie rankings, they are on flogfantasy.com. Code FLOG will get you 30% off any sub. Plus, you can check out not only all my rankings, but all the rankings of all your favorite creators. Our Dynasty Trade Calculator, our Dynasty Trade Finder. You can put in all your exact league settings for those as well. Plus all the premium content, including multiple Dynasty rookie draft guides. Find that in the link in the description, link comment section. Code FLOG, 30% off any sub. Plus yours truly will break down your Dynasty team in a podcast. But going over to our next page, I do need to move Kirk Cousins up compared to where I previously had him because massive contract, right? You get $100 million guaranteed. Cousins is a guaranteed starting quarterback for the next 2 seasons. However, he's 35, right? So Kirk Cousins is a great example of if I'm a rebuilding roster, this is your time to go out there and sell Kirk Cousins. Right now, he's being valued about the 110. If you could sell him for a future first in a Superflex league, I think that'd make a lot of sense. And then, yeah, I do want to reiterate, just in case you're watching this, these rookie pick values are for Superflex leagues. You can go to flogfantasy.com, pull up the 1 quarterback list if you want to look at that. But Bryce Young, I mean, going into year 2, I'd say he's almost just a rebuilding asset. I mean, he's quarterback 19 right now in Dynasty, but if you would look at where he's getting drafted in like an underdog best ball draft, for this next season, he's being valued as like a quarterback 3, but obviously you're having to pay a premium in Dynasty because he is 22 years old. So yeah, I'd say Bryce Young, definitely an asset you want on a rebuilding roster. Will Levis, I mean, right now is being valued right after the 112, right before an early second rounder. So yeah, I'm completely fine investing into Will Levis at this price point. You get Calvin Ridley coming over. I mean, this is a quarterback that we said at the very beginning of the offseason, if you look at the historical data, it's unlikely that he turns out to be an actual like franchise level option. But nonetheless, he's a quarterback that showed upside year 1. He had some pedigree. Remember, he was supposed to be like a top 5 pick last year until falling to the beginning of the second round. It's a changing coaching staff, a coaching staff that doesn't really have any allegiance to him. But if Will Levis comes out, has like a Jordan Love type season this next year, you could easily see him skyrocketing and no longer being worth a late first, early second, and instead being worth a mid round 1 pick next offseason. So when you have that wide range of outcomes, if you're a Will Levis believer, completely fine if you want to roster him on a rebuilding roster. Justin Fields will be our next guy. Justin Fields right now is being valued in between an early second rounder and a mid second round pick. Now, y'all know I've said for a very long time now, I mean, I've gotten so much hate for a very long time now. I am not a Justin Fields fan. I thought he was the most overrated asset in Dynasty last offseason. Earlier this offseason, it was kind of insane what his price point was. But if we look at this new price for Justin Fields, the most likely outcome is Justin Fields is not a starting quarterback this next season. The most likely outcome is Justin Fields is just a spot starter, a backup level quarterback for years to come at the NFL level. And the most likely outcome is he's never a full-blown starting quarterback in the NFL again, like going into his season. But even though that's the most likely outcome, that of course is not guaranteed. Fantasy football is a game about probabilities. And if there's a 40% chance that Justin Fields can turn back into a starting quarterback at the NFL level, 1, knowing the fan base that he has, 2, knowing the rushing upside that he has, 3, knowing he's only 24 years old. If you are a rebuilding roster and would rather have Justin Fields than a second round rookie pick, I completely understand where you're coming from, and I completely sign off on you going out there and investing in a Justin Fields at that price point, or at the very minimum, holding Justin Fields onto your roster and not selling him for the 203 on a rebuilding team. Now, going over to our next few quarterbacks, Matthew Stafford, Russell Wilson, Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers, Geno Smith. All of these guys are assets I would just classify as contending pieces. If I had them on my team, I would be looking to sell them. Now, ultimately, the question comes down to, okay, well, what's the price point you're getting? How are you going to sell these guys? Because the majority of the time when we're sitting here in March, nobody wants to go out there and trade for Matthew Stafford. Nobody's trying to go out there and trade for Russell Wilson. Nobody is looking to submit a starting lineup in March. I mean, at best, these guys are like QB3s on contending teams, right? Because if anybody's trading for these assets, it really has to be a contending roster. So I am fine, and I find myself doing this a lot in startups, like taking Daniel Jones over a late second round pick, just saying, okay, once the season comes around, I expect that a contending team, especially if they have a quarterback injury, would be willing to pay more than a late second round rookie pick for one of these spot starters at the quarterback position. So even though these assets are contending pieces, I would say plan A is to go to the trade block, throw them on there, go see if we can sell like Daniel Jones in a second rounder and move up into the first round of your rookie draft. But if you're not able to do that, I wouldn't fault you at all if you believe in the player, even if you are a rebuilding roster, to just hold them going into the season and then hope that by the time we get to weeks 2, 3, 4, you can approach a contending team when they're actually having to submit their starting lineup every single week. And then hopefully at that point, sell someone like Geno Smith for a second, third, and fourth round rookie pick during this season. Now, obviously, the issue with that is you are taking the timing risk, where if you go into the season and you're a rebuilding team, you have Geno Smith, your plans to sell Geno Smith during the year, and then all of a sudden Geno Smith goes down with an injury at the beginning of the season, you may be just out of luck, and all of a sudden you're not going to get anything appealing at all for Geno. So I would say let's put out the feeler now, because if you can sell them for a second and third right now, then at least you get the guaranteed price locked in, and it's not like that player can turn to an absolute zero for you. But if you're not getting a price that you like, it can't hurt to hold into the season and then try to pry some picks from a contender then. Now, going over to some other assets, Gardner Minshew right now is being valued about mid to late second round pick in 2025. With Minshew, baseline expectation, he's like a bridge quarterback for the Raiders, right? I mean, where you're not really expecting him to be a starting quarterback for the foreseeable future. This is a short-term ordeal. Maybe the Raiders go out there and take like Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., and then all of a sudden have a quarterback that they're replacing Gardner Minshew with halfway through the year. That is a possibility, but at the same time, I would say it's a very reasonable price point if you want to hold on to him, even on a rebuilding team, and try to sell him at the beginning of the year if you think you'd be able to get more than now. And then someone like Sam Howell, 23 years old, being valued as a third round pick. This is the spot where I would just rather have the quarterback, right? I would rather take the upside shot that he at one point is a starter this next year, and then you could sell him for a second. So even if some of these quarterbacks are assets that for sure only fit a contending team, the issue is just because they fit a contending roster, it doesn't mean you can go ahead and say sell them for anything right now. You may be better off waiting until the season starts to sell them and hopefully get a little more juice. But at the same time, if you do wait, you are taking on that risk that maybe they lose their job, that they fall in value, they get injured, et cetera, and get nothing. So if you have one of those assets like Stafford, like Cousins, I don't know, like Minshew, I'll throw them on the trade block, see what you can get. If you don't love it, you can wait till the start of the season and retrying then, but just understand that you are taking on a considerable amount of risk if you do that. But I think that's all I have for you. I know it seemed like we did not say that there were too many guys that you had to sell in this video. It's just because quarterback has such a long shelf life. It will be a lot different when we get to the other positions. So we'll talk about those later in the week. If you have not done so already, hit that like, subscribe if you play Dynasty. And if you want to check out all my Dynasty rankings, all the rankings of your favorite creators, if you want to get yours truly to break down your Dynasty team in a podcast, and tell you if you're rebuilding, if you're a contending team, come up with a plan of what we can do the rest of the offseason. Find all that on flockfantasy.com. Code FLOCK, 30% off any sub. And yours truly will break down your team in a podcast. But that's all I got for you. Appreciate you. Hope you have a great day. And hope we get to see you out with the video tomorrow.